The life I had before was full of uncertainty, clogged like pus formed in a broken hair follicle, vague, like a vision of Michelangelo's greatest work, crushed like a smoothie, moving one foot forward and the other one stuck back in 1982. In 1985, I grew up in a place called Roxbury, a place where working class communities did everything they could to provide for their families. They pushed their children to keep their eyes on the prize. And as an 8-year-old girl, I never paid attention to the graffiti on the walls or the broken glass on the ground or even the drug dealers doing their rounds. This, for me, was still my haven. And all the 8-year-old girls would come together with their cornrows and afro puffs, and we would come together and get ready to do our cadence. Boom, 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 boom. My name's Allana, I'm foxy fine, I am so fine. I got that look, I got that shape. All the girls want to take my place. My sign, Sagittarius, that's all right, because everyone knows I'm dynamite. A good day was when the fire hydrants were loose and we were able to let the water splash all over our body. Tito Fuentes could be heard out of Abuela's home, and Chile Vaciados reminded us that it was time to get home before the lights came on. And then I was told I was going to a new school. I would wake up at 4:30 a.m. in the morning to leave Roxbury and head to Sharon, Massachusetts. The cement started to slowly change into green grass, and I knew I was somewhere different, because when I entered the classroom, all I could see was a sea of vanilla faces, and there I stood, chocolate bean. Assumptions have played a major part of my life, and they have shaped my personal journey. Today, I invite you to walk with me down memory lane as I share a few stories that have shaped my journey and shifted my perspective. The Metropolitan Council for Education Opportunity, also known as the MECO program, was designed to help inner city students have a broader education. I was a MECO student, and for 2 years I worked on changing my language, enhancing my writing, and developing my communication skills. Now, my Roxbury friends, they definitely could see the difference. They would say things like, "Ooh, you sound like a white girl," during a game of kickball. My Sharon friends, on the other hand, would say, "Oh my goodness, did you see the news? Did you hear about the murder? Were you there?" And lastly, every now and then a few people would say, "You should feel really grateful for being a part of this program." And although I was grateful, I could always tell those who were doubting my potential. But it wasn't always that bad. With time, I was able to join a number of civic groups and really began to find my voice. Boom, 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 boom. I made it to college and now I'm free. I can be me. There is nobody watching me. I'm reaching for my destiny. As a freshman, I entered the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And at 17 years old, I was on a mission to understand who I was. But there were a few professors who really had a profound influence on my life. I tell you, when I first saw Professor Alex Deschamps, I'll never forget it, because she looked like Superwoman with a cape. And she talked to us about women icons like Sojourner Truth and Toni Morrison. She reminded us to use our voices as college females. And we became very appreciative of Sojourner Truth's very popular speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" She also challenged us, if we did not work hard, to try even better. That next term, I would enroll into a course about identity. Now, this instructor was interesting because when I saw her, she had long brown hair, a part in the middle. She definitely looked like she came right out of the 60s, and again, she had a vanilla face. She simply said, "Just call me Kaolin." And she talked about stories of colorism. She talked about racism. And she also experienced her own journey because she married a man of a different race and had biracial children. This instructor really caught my attention. But how could I ever forget Professor Nicholas McBride from the journalism department? He allowed me to create an independent study where I was able to merge art and culture together. And I absorbed Miles Davis. I absorbed Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. I could be found singing, "Blue skies smiling at me, talking about blue skies do I see," even though I knew in the 1930s many Americans were struggling to reach that American dream. But I continued, and I really felt like an archaeologist. I got into the elevator of the UMass Amherst Library, went all the way to the top of the 11th floor, and there I snuggled with 4 and 5 books. I read the stories about the separate fountains. I asked myself, what would life be like if I had to sit at the back of the bus? And I dared to ask myself, if Martin Luther King were here today, what would he say to me? Oh, I joined the newspaper, I spoke on the radio, and I even began to create different types of social groups. I started to try to answer that question, and I began to write. Rational minds, inked with ink blots, oppressed with intricate weaves of hatred, questioning cues that exude from your external or internal. You tell me, lying lips pervading wet, softly seeping from the dry spit dripping down the corner of your lips. Crocodile wonders, you say I'm sorry, but sorry don't cut the angroid, babies. I was burning for answers. And my college experience was truly eye-opening. I resolved that I would offer what Professor Deschamps, Kay Olin, and Mr. Nicholas McBride did for me. That was the gift of self-discovery. Boom, 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 boom. Dum, dum, da-dum. Many years later, I put the college years behind me. I had reached my American dream. I had the 2 cars, the house, and even a deck for cookouts. I was married now. But after 3 years, I started having excruciating pains. And these pains were so bad that I could be found on the floor in a curled up position. For 2 years, I went to doctors, trying to find the answers to my problems. And finally, a doctor said, "Allana, you have endometriosis." I said, "What? Endo?" Endometriosis is a condition where the uterine lining, which would normally be dispelled during aunt flow, begins to grow in other areas within your body. Symptoms include extreme pain and also a challenge with giving birth. When I heard this diagnosis, I felt stunted. I assumed that to be a full woman, I had to have 3 children by the age of 35. You see, for 5 years, I began to ask myself, why did I have this condition? For 5 years, I stopped writing, I stopped creating, and I stopped initiating anything new. I even hated going to parties where I could find other women. I went to this one party, this woman came up to me with her hands open wide, and she said, "Allana, where are they?" And I said, "Who?" And she said, "Your children." Oh, I felt dejected and confused. But all of this changed on one particular night. On one particular night, around 2 a.m. in the morning, I laid in my bed with my head looking at the ceiling saying, why did all of these things happen to me? Why did this problem have to interrupt my plans? And then I heard an inner nudge. It said, "Allana, I know you've been through all of these things. I know the pain you have endured. But what would life be like if you only had 120 days to live? I pondered some more, and a song came to mind. You've gotta live this new life, not like the life you've had before. So what would you do with 120 days? What would you do with 120 days? Something within me immediately shifted. I woke up the next morning, I pulled out journals that I had tucked in my closet for 14 years. And I got in my car and drove to Starbucks. And there I began to write my first self-help book, Tomorrow Can't Wait. I decided I would birth a new me, and I resolved that I would be happy. Just this past month, I had the opportunity to share my story with a group of women at the Codman Square branch of the Boston Public Library. I saw vanilla faces, I saw maroon faces, pecan faces, and I shared my story. At the end of my workshop, I looked out and saw a 30-year-old woman coming up to me. She had tears in her eyes. And she said to me, "You have changed my life today. If you did not decide to do this, I would never have been able to hear your story." In that moment, I hugged her for 3 minutes, and I knew within her a shift had happened. What would you do if you only had 120 days? Have you ever had a nudge to create a new project or to do something new, but you just kept putting it off? Perhaps you told yourself it's too late now, so much time has gone by. But I would like to leave you with these 3 thoughts. Number 1, what would happen if you were able to wipe the slate clean? Start completely over. And forgive yourself for the many years that you may have developed resentment. Number 2, how about revisiting some of the goals that you have for yourself? We cannot fully appreciate a butterfly unless we understand the caterpillar that it was. Truly, change takes process. And lastly, we can all be reminded of that 8-year-old within us that challenges us to live with fervor and excitement with the goal of becoming our best selves. You see, 120 days is the idea that we can all live our lives with a sense of urgency. Notable motivational speaker Les Brown says that the richest place on earth is in the grave, where people have buried their talents and their gifts. But that does not have to be you. So I encourage you to have what I call Einstein moments of stillness, because you might be amazed at just what you discover. Because you've got to live this new life, not like the life you've had before. So what would you do with 120 days?